One post, one comment. That's all it took to unravel a story that will haunt you. These are the crime stories that Reddit users lived through or witnessed. Stories that prove sometimes the most terrifying truths are found in the most unexpected places. I'm a police investigator in Yakutsk, Russia. Criminals aren't the only thing that keeps me awake at night. Everywhere you go in the world, there is crime being committed. It is the same here in Russia. Usually there are street robberies, sometimes very rarely murders, which is when the city government calls me in. A lot of the story I will tell you will certainly bring skepticism and doubt, but please believe me, I have little time left. I started off in the police force when I was 19. I rose up the ranks. In my 20s, I was confronted by one of my higher-ups and was asked if I wanted to investigate some of the crime here, since apparently many missing persons were found dead in alleyways and under bridges, with one thing in common: a symbol carved onto their neck. The HR wanted me to investigate the murders, in which I reluctantly accepted. I will forever regret it for the rest of my existence. It was a couple of days before I was brought into the case, but I was eventually in a room full of fellow investigators with an empty board. Okay, everybody, silent. Those of you who have been brought in here by the Yakutsk Police Department are going to be investigating several deaths that occurred, the lead investigator explained to us. As me and the rest of the team approached him, he pulled out a picture of one of the victims. As you can see, he said as he pointed at the neck in the photo, there appears to be a stick figure carved onto here. He then proceeded to pull out more photos from a box. See? Same thing. There is a connection here, as well as a very dangerous individual. We were all silent. We knew what we were going to be shown, but still, a lot of us were not prepared. He continued, we'll be heading to the most recent discovery of a victim. Get your stuff ready, we're going. We all moved at a fast pace to gather our things and run outside to a car. We got in, and the lead investigator drove us there. I expected it to take a few weeks to crack the case, but turns out it would take days of my and many other men's lives. It would take many lives. We arrived at the location and got out of the vehicle. Several policemen were guarding a checkpoint to stop anyone from wandering in. He led us to a body bag. Unzip it, officer. The lead said, you sure, sir? Logically, yes. He responded. The officer unzipped it and walked to the checkpoint. Jesus! I exclaimed, The lead responded. One of the investigators approached the body. I think I saw something under the shoulder. The investigator grabbed the decaying corpse and turned it around. There's a piece of paper, sir, he said as he turned to the lead. Let me see it, the lead said as he took it from him. Coordinates, it's north of here. 4 miles. Rookie, come here with your phone, he said as he pointed at me. I did as he said. Put these coordinates in. Zrania, I followed his instructions. It's an abandoned apartment, sir, I said. Well, that's where we're heading, he said as he zipped the bag. We all rushed back to our car and he drove us there. It was a 3-minute drive. We all had some small talk on the way regarding the case. We're here, everyone out, fast, fast, the lead said. We all ran out, Makarov's lowered at a fast pace. Go, go, go! Davai! He was screaming. Lead kicked down the entrance and ran in. Clear! We all followed him fast. We did the same to every room of the building until we reached the basement door. Get ready, there could be some spooky shit in here, he said as he walked down the stairs leading to the door. He unlowered his pistol and we did the same. Open the door for me, he said to me as I was at the front of the line. I approached and I felt as if something was seriously wrong, but I opened the door and the lead walked in, me behind him. There was a lamp pointing toward the wall. It was off. We approached it in the pitch black and scrambled to see if there was any on switch. Eventually it turned on. I turned to the wall, my skin went pale. The lead turned right after me and gasped. There was a tall, pale entity facing toward the wall. Hello, I asked. The lead told everyone to walk in. We all walked over to it. Hello? Do you need help? I repeated. It turned around and stared at us. It oddly reminded me of the stickman on all the victims. It screeched and ran at the lead. He discharged a round at its chest, but it kept going. It tackled him down and started ripping at his flesh. "Holy shit!" someone screamed. We all ran for the stairs. Most of us reached the door out of the basement. I saw many people try to run to the door. It was too late. It was too close to them. They wouldn't make it in time. I just stood there until a fellow investigator shut the door close and locked it. I heard screams and bangs on the door, poor bastards. I could hear them be ripped to shreds. I heard gunshots there, too. "Come on, that'll only hold him off for long," someone screamed. I finally got to my bearings and ran with everyone else. We got to the car and drove back to the station. We went in as 10 men and came out as 6. The highest-ranking officer in the station approached us as we came in. "What the hell happened? Where's your lead?" "He's dead, sir." I responded, "What happened?" He said, "Right before taking us to the investigation room, we gave our pistols to the HR as he was collecting them and putting them away." "You." He pointed at an investigator. "Explain what the hell happened." "Well, we encountered the killer, and we left." He could barely finish, "We left them for dead. It killed them all." He finished. "You didn't even try firing at it?" the HR asked. "We did. It did jack shit," I said. "You seem like the right guy for leading this. At least you ain't fucking stuttering like the rest," he said as he turned to me. 1 a.m. tonight, park outside the apartment. You will be listening in on the communications of our local raid team," he said. "You mean they're going in?" I asked. "Yes, what else would you be listening to?" he responded. "They will all die. It's use..." He cut me off with, "It's an order." At 1 a.m. in the morning, I was parked outside the apartment, listening in on the radio with a headset. "We're going in, do you read?" they asked. I read, "You can go in," I said in a hopeless voice. I knew I was going to listen in on a massacre. I heard them walk into the building, I heard them reach the stairs, and I heard them kick down the door. "Status?" I asked. "Positive, 0 probe," they responded. "Hello?" I exclaimed in fear. "Stop right there!" "Police! Police!" I heard shotgun blasts and running. "Status? You boys all right?" Zerania. My radio was cut off. The plan was I would take the raid team out of there with my car if shit hit the fan. If you don't understand, I had to go in there. I took off my headset and got out of my car. I had a pistol just in case I needed it. As I walked into the apartment, I smelled something vile. I knew these men were dead. The door to the basement was wide open. I walked in, aiming. I thought maybe if I didn't disturb it, it wouldn't notice me. I heard a whisper in the shadows. The room was pitch black. I just kept walking until someone grabbed my arm and pulled me back. It was one of the policemen. "Shh, stay quiet," he said. "Are you the only one left?" I whispered, "Yeah." He was snatched by something and pulled away. "Fuck! Fuck!" he was screaming. I ran around trying to find the lamp. I felt around and grabbed it. I turned it on and aimed it at the creature's face as it tore off the officer's wrist. "Ah!" he screamed. The creature was blinded and dropped him. It was too late for the officer. I dropped the lamp at the stairs and smashed the door behind me. I kept the lamp on, so if it broke through the door, maybe it would be blinded again and retreat back. I drove home and got to my bed. I got some rest. It would be better to report what happened later. I woke up, had some breakfast, and drove to the station as soon as I could. The HR was waiting for me as I walked in. "What happened last night?" he asked. "They all died. Like I predicted. We need to stop this." "I know," he said. "I got permission from the city government to use C4 explosives." He told me. "Finally," he said. "It's only been a couple days." I was saying, "Right." He cut me off. "I'm sending more officers to go in there with you." Without hesitation, I got into my car and drove behind several police cars. We arrived at the apartment. I got out of the car and watched as an armored policeman carrying a box of explosives ran into the building. Several other policemen had their guns aimed at the entrance. I noticed that a truck carrying concrete was moving toward the entrance. The policemen radioed something and they holstered their pistols. I got out my radio and asked the HR, "What's that truck doing here?" "It's closing off the entrance," he said. I turned off my radio. Just a second after, it dropped all the concrete down onto the entrance. Then suddenly, the explosives went off. I quickly realized the policeman was still inside there. "Why?" I was screaming. The HR walked to me. "It's okay." I walked over to some of the policemen. I realized they were the investigators I was working with. "Hey," I said. Is it dead?" one of the investigators asked. "Yes," I responded. I heard a shout, then a scream as I turned to where the door used to be. There was a pale arm sticking through, then a foot pushed out the rubble. After this is posted, well, there's nothing I can do this time. They are trying to toss more concrete onto it. That won't work. May only gold help the poor civilians in the houses nearby. I realize my fate and close my eyes. I hope you will enjoy this story, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's move to our second story. There's a dark truth connecting. 3 1980s upstate New York murder cases. This comes from someone who claims to be a former forensic investigator that worked for a few precincts in upstate New York. To clarify, I have no personal ties to this person, don't know why they specifically reached out to me, or felt this page was their only remaining option to tell their story. I'm simply passing along what they said and will leave it to your own interpretation. After conducting my own research, however, I will say their theories are plausible, and whoever this is genuinely believes they've uncovered something heinous. Here's the account I received, told in their point of view. I worked as a forensic investigator in New York State's Delaware and Columbia counties. I've seen my fair share of crime scenes, from child suicides at ages they had no business of even entertaining such thoughts, to gruesome accidents and murder victims killed in the worst ways imaginable. There were 3 particular cases whose backstories compelled me to dig deeper, even after the official investigations concluded. What I found made me question the extent of reality, human depravity, and avarice. The first happened in East Chatham, December 1986. A teen, who I'll refer to as Will, murdered 4 of his family members, seeming to be driven by financial gain. All 4 bodies were discovered in their bedrooms, dying from gunshot wounds to the head. Despite being described as a shallow, detached individual, Will excelled in school and was thought to have a bright future. His family was very active in the community and owned a successful business, which made these murders especially stunning. The teen readily confessed when questioned, but wasn't very forthcoming on certain crime scene details. Dozens of candles placed on top of coins scattered around the house, inscriptions written in blood on the living room floor, most of which we couldn't document because they were repeatedly tracked over before we arrived, and the bodies all being smeared with an oily, light green substance. The coroner reports on all 4 bodies described their wounds as narrow, bullet-shaped holes entering through the victim's forehead and exiting through the back. The exit wounds looked nothing like those made by bullets, no casings or rounds were found, and tests for gunpowder residue were incidentally damaged at the lab by a pipe burst. While the official report said all 4 victims died from gunshots, it was technically never proven. Thinking they had sufficient evidence, detectives saw no need to investigate further after Will confessed, and overlooked these bizarre details. Although they determined Will, who claimed to have no recollection of that night, suffered a psychotic breakdown, I always suspected he had an ulterior motive. Any attempts at deciphering what was written on the living room floor were futile, except for one semi-legible phrase, JUDOC. The light green slippery substance slathered on all 4 bodies was also identified as money oil, an herbal remedy used in witchcraft that supposedly brings prosperous wealth. Although many acknowledged there was a lot more going on, everyone ultimately wanted to move forward and minimize the attention East Chatham was receiving from this tragedy. In the end, I understood the desire to put this dark chapter of East Chatham's history behind us, and eventually accepted I wouldn't learn any more about what happened than what was already known. Fast forward a few years later when I was working in Delaware County. The second case happened in June 1989, another mass murder that conjured up memories of East Chatham. A 23-year-old, I'll call Evan, murdered his family at their cabin outside Stamford. Lit candles placed on top of coins littered the home, where 4 bodies were found in the house's attic. Initially perceived as gunshots, the autopsy report explained their wounds as being bullet-shaped entrances that went completely through the victim's body. Unlike the East Chatham killings, these murder victims contained several deep perforations. The bodies were centered around a strange symbol that seemed to depict a blocky, crookedly drawn uppercase B. A small backwards J protruded from the B's lower left corner, while a jagged uppercase T branched off its top left end. The emblem was drawn with a scorched powder that, based on samples recovered, had an initial light green color and was composed of different herbs. It looked like Evan had been interrupted in the middle of whatever he was doing, prompting him to flee. He was cornered at an abandoned farm in a neighboring county, which ensued a lengthy standoff. Before being gunned down after opening fire on police, officers on scene recalled Evan kept screaming he was so close, needed to complete the circle and finish the process. One bizarre piece of evidence was a black envelope Evan had pinned on his family's business storefront sometime after committing the murders. It was covered in green wax and contained burnt remnants of paper that, from what few strands were salvaged, appeared to be some kind of letter or note. Although Evan apparently had severe mental issues, this dismissive explanation for his appalling actions disregarded some alarming details. Evan was apparently obsessed with money and wealth, to the point where it influenced him at a cognitive level. He stood to assume his entire family's estate, which, according to friends of his, Evan incessantly pondered about the liquid value of and what he'd do with all that cash. When I disputed the investigation's conclusions, my police chief gave a familiar explanation. "Evan's dead," he said. "No need to allocate time and resources to an already solved case." Even after noting every similarity with the East Chatham murders, he wouldn't entertain any further inquiries and eventually reassigned me to another division. It was after this I learned the powdery substance found in the attic was identified as money powder, which had many similar vegetal ingredients as its oleaginous counterpart, money oil. Despite violating orders and an abundance of department codes, I started my own secret investigation trying to connect these cases. There was so much overlap between them that I couldn't let this go without leaving no stone unturned. Both killings were committed by young men with financial motives. They murdered their families in near-identical manners. Candles placed on top of coins and substances made from the same materials were found at both crime scenes. Although I was convinced Will and Evan were trying to perform the same or closely related rituals, my evidence was circumstantial at best. I needed a direct link connecting them that would give my theory the credence necessary to be taken seriously. About a year into my independent probe, a case from February 1988 in Groveland, New York was brought to my attention. A man, I'll call Larry, murdered his whole family before committing suicide and setting their house on fire. After extinguishing the blaze, police discovered 5 bodies. Larry killed his wife and 3 children, who were each found lying in their beds. Although gunshots were officially deemed all 5 victims' causes of death, Larry was the only one described as being explicitly caused by a firearm. His wife and kids died from what the documents described as wounds closely resembling a gunshot that completely passed through the victim's cranial region. For me, there were 2 affirming details in this case that connected to the East Chatham and Stamford killings. Investigators determined the fire was started by lighting a charred black envelope. The note inside was too badly burned and no longer legible, but this envelope looked exactly like the one Evan pinned on his family's storefront. Larry also had a tattoo on his back matching the symbol found at the Stamford scene, a jagged B with a smaller uppercase T and backwards J stemming from its corners. I also discovered Larry and his wife were having marital problems, which derived from a crippling financial situation that put them on the precipice of ruin. Finding this case led to more chilling discoveries. One regarded an owl rope bracelet with a gold wolf head charm Larry had on his wrist. Will wore the exact same bracelet when he was found, which I neglected to mention earlier. Despite living in Groveland when murdering his family, Larry settled there fairly recently, having lived most of his life in Schoharie County. Not only did he own a business in East Chatham from 1983 to 1985, where Will happened to work for 8 months, but the abandoned farmhouse where Evan made his final stand was on land formerly owned by Larry's family. I delved further into Larry's background. Although information was hard to come by, it led me to learning about lupus viridis, meaning green wolf in Latin. What little I found described them as some kind of fraternal order where Larry was a member. The only other details I uncovered about lupus viridis was that they were formerly headquartered in a now abandoned lodge located somewhere between Medusa and South Westerlo, roughly the midway point between East Chatham and Stamford. The lodge burned down in the summer of 1989, after which the organization appeared to cease operations. The former lodge's dilapidated remains still stand today. I spent months trying to uncover more about lupus viridis, but had stagnant progress and came to a barrage of dead ends. Shortly after, however, my rogue investigation was halted after being discovered by the DA's office. Although no charges were pressed, the police confiscated most of my documents and case files, after which I was swiftly terminated. A few years passed when something seemingly out of the blue happened that dragged me back down this rabbit hole. I woke up one morning to find hundreds of papers, which came from a filing cabinet filled with old files I still had on these cases that the police somehow missed, littering the room where they were kept. Written on every one of those papers was a 6-letter word, Mammon. It was written in what appeared to be blood, and I initially neglected to mention the filing cabinet holding these old documents was in my bedroom. I couldn't let anyone know these files were still in my possession, so I took to the internet, where I gained a lot of perturbing insight on this word's meaning. Mammon was a theological demonic entity representing greed and want, who promised its worshippers boundless wealth. I almost fell over after first seeing Mammon's sigil, a distorted B with an uppercase T and backwards J jutting from its upper and lower left corners. It was the same symbol found in Will's attic and tattooed on Larry's back. This led me to read up on the different rituals for summoning Mammon. They varied in complexity, and many involved using specific items like candles, coins, owl rope, herbal remedies like money oil and powder, along with writing letters and requests to Mammon that you burn or place in black envelopes. I was especially bothered by a redundant detail of Mammon's appearance that was in quite a few visual depictions of the being. Many had Mammon brandishing a long, narrow spike that retracted from its wrist, which was used to impale its victims' bodies. The stories I read said Mammon extracted people's souls in this grisly manner, which were added to a collection it amassed over the millennia. It made me think about the wounds every one of those cases' murder victims had, which every report was quick to write off as gunshots. What else could create that type of opening? Were those poor souls truly at rest, or suffering a far worse fate? Mammon also apparently frequented the form of a wolf, which made sense of the fraternal order being named Lupus Viridis, and those owl rope bracelets worn by Will and Larry having wolf head charms. I also don't think the dates all 3 massacres occurred were randomly chosen. Will killed his family on December 13th, when the feast of St. Judoc was held. Judoc, the word we found written at the East Chatham crime scene, was a young, wealthy prince who gave up his opulence to become a priest. He lived a life of modesty, solitude, and was said to be a staunch adversary of Mammon, since he stood against everything the demon represented. Apparently, using blood to write names of you or your deity's antagonists is a form of mockery and scorn in occultism that supposedly appeases and empowers your idol. The Stamford murders happened on June 22nd, which falls on the summer solstice, whose signified period of growth is considered an opportune time to summon certain beings, and when the season of Mammon begins. Larry's murder-suicide occurred on February 28, 1988, which fell on a leap year. In the dark arts, leap years are supposed to provide a window for spirits and other beings to enter our world. It's worth mentioning many works I read about or mentioned, Mammon described him coming in and out of our world using these leap year portals. Having presented my facts, I'll now tell you what I believe happened. Lupus Virtus was secretly a cult dedicated to Mammon, whose members sought wealth and prosperity. Some rituals for summoning this being, say, flesh and blood offerings, yielded greater rewards based on enormity, if done correctly and precisely. I suppose the magnitude of sacrificing one's family was thought to yield endless rewards from this being. Larry recruited Will and Evan, who became indoctrinated by the Order's teachings. My guess is Will failed to properly complete his ritual, causing him to undergo an irreversible mental breakdown. Evan appeared to have gotten interrupted while performing his, likely by police when they arrived at the house. Larry's situation was less clear. He was overcome with grief either for botching or coming to grips on what he was actually doing during his ritual, and ended his life in response. After how much publicity the Stamford killings got, Lupus Virtus probably decided to vacate the area or go underground, which could explain why their lodge burned. I expectedly made waves when trying to get my findings reviewed and investigate whether Lupus Virtus was still operating. I should have seen it coming, but anyone who even gave me the time of day dismissed my report, saying the evidence was too disputable, circumstantial, and, most insulting of all, inventive. I eventually gave up when my former precincts threatened me with legal action for not turning over all the files and documents I still had, who said I was rehashing settled business that had no need to be revisited. Things settled down for a while afterwards until something that happened recently. I found a familiar-looking black envelope among some of my spouse's belongings while clearing out a room that we were renovating. After reading the recently dated letter it contained, I now know I'm not safe in my home, and have been closely watched by people I've known and loved for years on behalf of a certain aforementioned organization. I don't know who to trust or where I'll go, but I hope making my story known will help anyone that is or suspects they're in a similar situation. This goes way deeper than expected, and those cases I used to put this puzzle together may only be the beginning of uncovering what other horrors this entity and its devout followers have committed. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the darker side of Reddit. If you enjoyed these stories, please like and subscribe for more. And if you have a Reddit crime story you'd like to share, leave it in the comments below. Let's discuss.